Hello. My name is Marlene Cameron. In celebration of the 50th anniversary of Sydney Banks' Enlightenment experience, individuals have been impacted by the three principles understanding are sharing their insights and stories of transformation. Dr. Joe Bailey is a licensed psychologist who met Sydney Banks in 1980 and was mentored by him for the next 29 years. Joe has written 6 books on the three principles paradigm that are in 65 countries in 26 languages. His life's work has been to help people find true happiness and peace of mind. So welcome, Dr. Bailey.
Thank you.
So could you briefly share what your life looked like before you had your first insight into the three principles?
So as you said, I was a psychologist. So I think I was about 33 years old when I met Sid. And prior to that time, I had gone to graduate school in clinical psychology and went down the traditional route where you take people back in the past and have them beat pillows and get their anger out and bring their families in to resolve issues from their childhood. And it was all about dealing with the past and emotional suffering and getting those feelings out. So my work was, seeing 6, 7, 8 people a day going through trauma, going through the past. And it was after doing this for 6, 7 years, I realized people weren't really getting well. It was like a revolving door. They'd come in with one issue, they'd resolve that issue, they'd come back a few weeks later and they'd have another issue. So they never really got well. It was almost like a conveyor belt of issues. And I was just solving one issue after another, but I wasn't really helping people find mental health. And so I was very frustrated. And so I started taking people in the wilderness and having positive experiences and then working through all the issues too. So I knew there was something other than taking people back and reliving the past because it just wasn't working. And I was getting burned out. As a matter of fact, I was starting to fantasize about quitting being a psychologist and going into, I don't know, being a forest ranger or something other than working with people because it had become very draining to me personally. And I was involved in my own psychotherapy and my own support groups, and we just keep talking about the issues over and over again, but never really getting better. So I was on the bus stop, you might say, for change when my best friend, Dr. Keith Blevins, who had gone to graduate school with in Texas, he had been sending me Sid tapes for a few years. And every time I thought, oh God, he's living in San Francisco. It's another California hippity-dippity-doo trip, and I wouldn't even listen to it. I had no ears for it because I was very skeptical of anything proving to be a panacea in psychology. And so, but for whatever reason, at that particular time in 1980, when he called me and said, Sid's going to be speaking in Miami and doing a conference at the medical school. Why don't you come down? It's cold in Minnesota, it's warm in Miami, and just, listen to Sid. And by the way, there's this woman we want you to meet too. I think you might like her. So that's my wife of 40 some years, who I'm still married to. So I met Michael, my wife. She got off the plane and it was love at first sight. That was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And then that evening, we all went over to Rick Suarez's sister's house and had a meal and then sat around the living room and Sid started to speak. Everyone was sitting in a circle and I'm just jabbering away and talking to people and everybody gets really quiet except me. And all of a sudden I could see all eyes were on me and I'm like, oh, what did I do wrong here? What's going on? And then Sid started to speak and everything he was saying went against everything I had been taught as a psychologist. It was 180 degrees the opposite. People weren't broken. They were innately mentally healthy. Oh no, people are innately mentally ill. The only lucky few are born with mental health. And so I was torn. Everything he was saying was going against my education, what I had really become an expert at. But in my soul, in my heart, everything was saying felt so true, so right. In spite of my intellect, it penetrated. And I just got drawn in, and it seemed every skeptical thought I had, Sid almost seemed like he was reading my mind, and he would address it with the next statement. So that scared me. I thought, who is this guy? His power threatened me. And part of me was drawn and finally hearing something that I'd always been looking for. And my intellect was wanting to run out of the room and escape as fast as I possibly could. So that was my initial response to Sydney Banks. But here I am, you know, uh, many, many decades later, and I've never looked back. And so that was, for me, the turning point, was me.
Wow. So what was your insight?
Uh, I can't really say um, what my insight was. I just had a feeling of going back home, how I felt before I got contaminated with my personal thinking, how I felt as a young child. I felt an innocence and an inner peace that I would just have glimpses of when meditating or running or being in nature. But something shifted in me in that weekend. And I didn't know if it was because I was falling in love with my wife or if it was Sid Banks or it was a combination. I didn't know but I came back and I was a completely different person from that trip to Miami. And my colleagues, they didn't know what to make of me. They just, you were Mr. Gloom before, and now you're all happy. And what's going on? And there were rumors that I was on drugs or something, or and then they thought, oh, you just fell in love, that's why. And but when I started working with my patients, I just couldn't do what I'd been doing before. It just felt wrong. But I didn't know what to do instead. I wasn't Sydney Banks. I didn't have an enlightening experience. But I just started sharing what I was beginning to see in my own life and how my stress was falling away without any effort, without any techniques. How I was finding joy in my work again, and how I was starting to see results. I didn't even know what I was saying or doing, but my clients started getting better and getting well and quitting therapy because they got what they were looking for. That had never happened before. They saw me forever. You didn't have to have a large practice because you could see people for years. But once I switched to working with the principles that Sid was speaking about, my clients were getting out of therapy within, a month to 3 months. They'd be done. They would be extremely grateful. But they'd sit in the waiting room with all the other patients of the other traditional psychologists, social workers, and their patients would start looking at my patients and going, what is your psychologist telling you? How come you come out with a smile or holding hands with your mate? We come out crying with tissues in our hand or angry. What are you doing with him? And so people started to get curious, and the other therapists got curious. And so pretty soon, Chris Heath was the first one that said that she wanted to learn. And so I brought Dr. Roger Mills to the University of Minnesota to give a talk about this new psychology. And they all came. All my colleagues came. Chris was the only one that heard anything.
Oh.
The rest were so threatened because one said to me, well, Joe, gee, this isn't a very good financial model. If your patients get well, how are you going to make a living? I got to send my kids to college. This isn't a viable financial model. So so Chris and I moved on, and because we had so many patients coming to us, got referred to us, so we had to train other therapists in the principles so we could handle the caseloads. And so we started the Minneapolis Institute of Mental Health after about a year after meeting Sid. So that was it transformed my career, and I've never looked back.
Wow. You pretty much answered the next question.
Oh, good.
How your life has changed and your practice changed. So we'll go on to the last question then. How do you see this understanding changing the field of mental health or your understanding of the human spirit?
Well, I really truly believe this is a true paradigm shift, that it's an inside out paradigm rather than an outside in paradigm. Most traditional psychology and other helping methods, technology, techniques have you do something to experience momentary feelings of well being or relief from your symptoms. The three principles points people back to the well of constant insight and constant transformation of themselves without the need to stay dependent on a therapeutic model to to be well. And so what I've seen in my career as I've moved beyond just being a psychotherapist to seeing how this could help school systems to train teachers in the three principles and how that changed the way they manage their classrooms, what happened to the mental health of their children, to bring this into corporations, police forces. I've taken this into healthcare. I've worked with the Mayo Clinic, training their physicians in the principles. So it really is wherever there's a human being and they gain an understanding of the principles, it transforms and reawakens that human spirit that is not damaged, that is not harmed by their conditioning, their habits, their genetics, or anything else. So for me, this is what I always was looking for when I got into the field in the first place, was a way to bring mental health to the world. And that's what Sid's insight, his revelation, his transformation awakening brought to the world, to this simple welder. And that's in of itself is an amazing story, who didn't have an education in any of this, spoke to huge audiences of psychologists, psychiatrists, physicists, you name it. And even though he's not with us and hasn't been with us for a long time, this just continues to go out. I've traveled to every continent in the world teaching this. My books are in just almost every language. I never thought I would ever write a book. I never thought I would ever travel abroad. And so it is completely changed, and I can see just the extraordinary work being done in Africa and Europe and Latin America. It's just exploded into a world phenomenon. It's still in the very beginning, but as Sid Banks said to us often, the cat's out of the bag. You can't put truth back in the bag, and it's just going to continue to spread. My work is done. He would say, my work is done. Really? There's only a handful of us. A few years later, more and more. You've just seen it grow and grow and grow. So I feel at the kind of the tail end of my career here in my mid 70s, although I'll probably never stop teaching the principles as long as I have a heartbeat. I just see this with so much hope and so much for humanity, that this understanding is here to stay.
Well, thank you. Beautiful. Is there anything else?
Uh, I don't know. I think that's about it,
Okay.
unless you have another question.
No, that's everything. Thank you very much. So
Yeah, you're very welcome.